the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
All right, we are off and running. That was everything that we wanted to see and more. NFL free agency delivered in a big way. And believe me when I tell you, once again, you have hit play on the Exact Right podcast. Welcome into the Spot Track Podcast. Brandon Kravitz here, your host for the day, along with the money man himself, Mike Ginnitti. Mike, I assume that your gas tank is on E, but this time of year, it's got to all be worth it.
I got to tell you, I really like this tampering period and how this is all kind of progressing. This used to be a full week of just no sleep, things dropping at 2 a.m., et cetera. It feels like it all got crunched in like 12 hours, and then we get a day or two to digest this, and there'll be a second wave, but this is kind of manageable. I'm not going to lie to you. We've had way worse years in terms of how this NFL offseason has gone. So I think maybe some teams have figured it out here, and I like it.
Yeah, the legal tampering period started on Monday, March 11th, and the deals were flying in the moment that window opened at 12 p.m. Eastern time. It almost makes me wonder if they're having these conversations before the legal tampering period.
Yeah, you would think. And by the way, it sounds like the Eagles might be in a little trouble for that with Saquon Barkley. We'll have to keep an eye on that one.
Yeah. So do you have any idea what goes into a quote investigation like that?
Well, it sounds like there were some phone calls made, so there might be some ways to trace it. But it's pretty simple. The GM specifically cannot talk during the tampering period. It's got to be like an agent to team. The player himself cannot talk unless he is not represented by an agent. So if there's any kind of conversation, direct line conversation between Howie Roseman and Saquon Barkley, I don't know if you find out, but to me, this one seems kind of Jalen Brunson-y, where it'll be a slap on the wrist, and we'll go from there.
Right. Yeah, I saw Jason Kelce came out, and he's already kicking himself for retiring.
Not coming back. I know. I saw that.
Let's start with the most recent news. I mean, there's so many different directions that we can go here, so we'll try and hit as many as we possibly can. But we'll start with the most recent news and then kind of work our way through some of the bigger signings that have gone down, winners, losers, that sort of thing, and some broader topics along the way. I definitely want to talk about this running back position and the renaissance that we're seeing. Calvin Ridley to the Titans, a very active Titans free agency. They've signed a bunch of players, 4 years, $92 million, 50 guaranteed is what's being reported. And here I was thinking there was no market for this guy. The wide receivers were just sort of sitting stagnant in that first initial wave of free agency. What are your thoughts on that deal and his fit in Tennessee and what Tennessee's doing in general?
I was ready to talk Tennessee before Calvin Ridley signed that contract yesterday. So I'm extremely invested in what this team is doing for one reason. This feels like a team, or a front office at least, and it's a new front office and a new coaching staff. This feels like an organization that knows what they might have in Will Levis, right? Maybe the rest of us don't exactly know yet, but it seems like somebody in that room knows what's happening because they are building a roster to win. They are not ready to slow play this thing at all. So that's exciting. I thought the center signing, Lloyd Cushenberry out of Denver, was step one of this whole process. That was a big miss for them last year. They need a left tackle, and luckily this is maybe the deepest left tackle draft we're going to have in years here. So I expect that to be their first pick on April 25th. They've addressed the cornerback situation. They've addressed the edge rusher situation. They brought in what I think could be a value running back play with Tony Pollard on 3 for 21, really just 1 year guaranteed. And then this Ridley contract is an overpay. There's no question it's an overpay. But this was a garbage free agency for wide receivers. This is all about extensions this year, not free agency. So if this was the guy, if this was the name, you got to do what you got to do to get him. And if it's, $50 million over the course of 2 years, which is probably what this is, a 2 for 50. I haven't not yet seen the structure on this one. That's too new. That's not terrible. By the way, that's probably the contract they were going to give A.J. Brown a couple of years ago, and they weren't ready to do it, and now they are. So again, it's not just the players that they brought in and the brevity of the contracts. It's the reasoning for why they're doing this. I read this as Will Levis might be a guy, and we should probably start paying attention to that.
I really like Will Levis. I liked him coming out of the draft, and he had his moments, and especially out of the gate, he had some big time performances for the Titans. So maybe they do see something they really like. But even if they're not 100% sure, if you know that you have a rookie quarterback that you have starting, isn't this how you should operate anyway? Whether you believe in that guy or not, you either believe in him, so you want to build around him and try and win, or you don't believe in him and you just say, let's pretend like we do. And let's build a roster. And then if we have to plop a quarterback in there a year later, we'll do that. Yeah,
it's either that or they're preparing to acquire Dak Prescott, right? One of those two things. Is that how you're reading that? You're not reading that way. Okay.
No. I don't know. That doesn't seem like the move for Tennessee. I think they are going to give this Will Levis thing a shot. And don't worry, we'll spend time on Dallas. They're their own story. But interesting moves for Tennessee. What are the Jags doing? Not aggressively trying to find a wide receiver one for their young quarterback. Like, it seems like they're kind of going in the opposite direction. I like Gabe Davis. I live in Orlando, and he's a hometown guy. Went to UCF, but that's not a real number one wide receiver. It feels like they're missing that piece if they really want to supply their quarterback with a guy. Maybe Calvin Ridley wasn't the right fit, but they gotta kind of put their foot on the pedal here, right?
I'm not sure I completely agree. I do agree that Ridley wasn't the best fit for Trevor Lawrence. That became pretty obvious about halfway through the season. He just wasn't separating enough. I think that's what this is about. I think let's just bring in three guys that can at least get separation. And if Trevor Lawrence can't hit these guys, then we're simply just not going to pay this quarterback. I think that's what this is about. It's about depth versus overpaying for one player at one position, even though Christian Kirk at this point in time is getting a little bit pricey at the back end of that contract. I'm not super against this. There's probably a draft pick coming as well in terms of a weapon for this offense. Evan Engram is certainly a big pass catching option on this offense, at least for one more season guaranteed. So I'm okay with teams not going big with a WR1 right now, especially if that player is not going to be, one of the premier wide receivers in the league, like a Jefferson, like a Chase, etc. So I think depth can be just as successful at this position. And by the way, I kind of think that's where this position is going anyway, versus, one player at $40 million a year, which is where this thing is heading in the next 3-4 years.
So wait, are you telling me that these conversations we've had about running backs for the last 5 years is about to go the way of the wide receiver by committee?
I don't think it'll be as drastic, right? Because I think there'll be more unicorns, whereas right now there's one unicorn at the running back position, and there has been for almost half a decade, unfortunately, with McCaffrey. We're going to have 6 guys that kind of stand in their own tier, and those guys will continue to be paid.
Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson.
But CD Lamb.
If you're not those guys, if you don't have one of those guys, then you might as well do it by committee, is kind of the thought. And I don't totally disagree. Look at Buffalo. Like Buffalo viewed, maybe past tense, Stephon Diggs is one of those unicorn guys, and he's not. He's a good wide receiver, really good. Well, he's not. CD Lamb, I would probably throw in that mix. But the list, you're right, is pretty short. And this is a really good year. You need a wide receiver. The draft, that might be the deepest position in this year's draft is wide receiver. So maybe the Jags are setting themselves up there. You thought that they would go heavy wide receiver DB throughout the offseason, not necessarily just in free agency. Right. So the Darnell Savage move, I would think, would be one that kind of fit the bill for what you would expect from Jacksonville.
Yeah, no question. They're not done defensively speaking. There's probably 3-4 more moves coming, and then a big draft with that as well. So if they want to compete, and obviously that's still the plan, regardless of what happens with Lawrence in this contract situation, they're going to have to bolster up the defensive side of the ball. And then, like you said, probably add at least one weapon in April.
Okay, well, since we're on the AFC South, let's just stay there for a moment, kind of wrap up the division. The Colts did sign Joe Flacco, so that's an interesting move as he backs up the second-year player, Anthony Richardson. But the Houston Texans are the real needle movers. Tennessee is interesting. The Jags raised my eyebrow at them for some of their moves, but I think you settled me down. But Houston trading for Joe Mixon. They bring in Danielle Hunter from Minnesota. They have added pieces to this team. Jeff Okudah, the defensive back. This is a team that's ready to put the pedal to the metal. talk about a team that believes in their guy and CJ Stroud. Do you like the moves that Houston's made so far?
Yeah, I've got him at 10 free agent signings and then the acquisition of Mixon. So 11 signature moves this offseason already. It's outstanding. This feels quite a bit like when the Cincinnati Bengals figured out that Joe Burrow was Joe Burrow, right? I mean, they're not overreacting, right? They're not shelling out too much. Now, the Danielle Hunter contract, and I've already written about it, it's about to post now, is outstanding. I mean, you know me in short, fully guaranteed contracts. This is a dream for a 30-year-old edge rusher, getting basically 2 for $49 fully guaranteed. That's going to be the bookend to Will Anderson, so absolutely nothing wrong with that. They did trade away a defensive tackle to San Francisco, so I think there's a hole there, and they haven't addressed that yet, but that could be DJ Reader coming back here in a couple of hours from what I'm reading some tea leaves with. And if that's the move, look out, because this team should walk through this division and be absolutely in the conversation for the AFC come next January. So it's all been calculated. It's all been, really necessary hole-filling moves, and they've got a bunch of draft picks coming up here as well. So I don't put them out on anything. And oh, by the way, they've got a stud first-round cornerback. This team's not out of conversation for L'Jarius Sneed. This is one of the teams I have kind of penciled in as at least considering L'Jarius Sneed coming out of Kansas City on a trade from the Tag. So they may not be done, but even if they are done and it's just about a draft from here out, they've done plenty of really savvy things to bolster this roster for CJ Stroud.
Yeah, the odds makers approve as well. 20-1 to win the Super Bowl right now.
I didn't look yet. Nice.
Yeah. So I do have to ask about the running back renaissance here that we have found ourselves in. I think there could be some debate about exactly how plush it is. Maybe we're just used to the devaluing of the position to where now that we've had that beaten over our heads for a few years, all of a sudden you see some guaranteed money go the way of running backs and a bunch of them sign and we go, ooh, they're back. These are not the biggest deals in free agency by any means, but at least in my view, it's clear that teams value the bell cow right now more than the narrative would suggest. So how do you read what we have seen over the last couple of days as it pertains to the running back position?
Before we get there, because you're hitting on it here pretty hard, I'm about to launch a piece that is going to be a sort of an evergreen piece that I continue to add to as things break. It's called the NFL free agency reality check. and it is basically I'm running through every contract sorted by the total value. And I'm telling you, all right, here's what the number is. Here's what it really means. And obviously with these running backs, Josh Jacobs 4 for $48 million, unfortunately is not 4 for $48 million, right? It's 1 for $14 million. And that's sort of how most of these look.
That is such a gap between.
It is.
It's fantasy and reality.
Yeah.
That is exactly why. I mean, I cannot endorse looking into this enough. If you're interested in the contract signings, like we can all read the headlines that are out there and react to that, but you got to take it with a grain of salt, because that stuff that the BS that you sift through really tells us where these positions and these players and these teams are at.
Right. And look, I'm not trying to discount the fact that Josh Jacobs could make $48 million over the next 4 seasons. That could happen. And by the way, in Green Bay, they do like to play out contracts quite a bit, right? Aaron Jones almost got to the finish line on his. He did get to the finish line on his first one. So it does happen in that organization. It's just, I at least need to draw the line where this thing could get cut off at some point in time, because there's just too much movement with most of these positions. Let's talk about the Barkley one, though, because it's real. It's got a guaranteed salary, $1.5 million of guarantee in the 3rd year, which most quarterbacks don't even get, let alone running backs, right? So it's still a 2 for $26 million contract, but that's $13 million a year. That's fully guaranteed. And this is not the worst team in football, right? So this is a good team paying a good running back good money. That's the 1 + 1 + 1 that we have not had in quite a long time here. So let's definitely put this one on the pedestal it belongs on. You made a really good point, though. I think one of the reasons, obviously, the supply here was ridiculous. I mean, the names go on and on and on. Derrick Henry, Devin Singletary. Christ, there were 5 teams fighting over Zach Moss on Monday, right? About who should get Zach Moss.
It feels like Austin Eckler to the Commanders has flown completely under the radar. I hear nobody talking about it because there's 6 other running back new fits that just feel like a bigger deal.
That's exactly right. And you made the point that the bell cows, got signed. It's very rare that we get 3 down backs that hit the open market, at least in the 26 to 29 age range, right? Which is just when you're going to be there if you're a running back hitting the open market. There were like 12 this year, right? I mean, these guys are all going to start. Aaron Jones is going to start for Minnesota, right? Zach Moss is going to start for Cincinnati. Eckler certainly going to be the bell cow in Washington now. So the supply was there, the need was there, and it's just not a great draft. It looks like maybe late second round at best for the first running back off the board. So It was a perfect storm, everything kind of coming together. This is not going to be an annual tradition, unfortunately, but when it happens, we all should talk about it for days and days and days, right? We should talk about the fact that 30-year-old Derrick Henry just got himself $9 million fully guaranteed, because last year, quite frankly, starting running backs were having trouble getting $2 million guaranteed. And that's not hyperbole. You can go back to our free agent tracker last year and look. A hell of a lot of starting running backs were on basically minimum contracts with signing bonuses getting the $2 million. That's not what happened this year, okay? Aaron Jones got released. He's almost 30 years old, and he got $7 million from the Minnesota Vikings. That's a real deal. DJ Dallas, did you even remember he was in the league?
Nope.
He signed a 3 for $8.25 million contract. Now it's a 1 for 3, but just the fact that he's under term for $8 million with the Arizona Cardinals is impressive. So it's a bit of a comeback. You can see that teams are valuing these players, but whenever the draft is rich with these guys, you're going to see it go back down to $2-3 million for sure.
Yeah, to the perfect storm point last year. You remember the conversation was, oh my God, all these running backs are getting franchise tagged.
Yeah.
Well, what happens after a guy gets franchise tagged? Either you sign him long term, or he's walking out the door. You're not going to tag him again. And so that was part of that perfect storm, is that none of these guys were either played to the level of got to keep them on this roster, or were on teams where they could really justify this is where we need to be spending our money. The Raiders, like Josh Jacobs is still a really good running back, but the Raiders aren't in the business of we got to have a bell cow. Their starting quarterback right now is either Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew. Come on. So I think that's kind of, that perfect storm point.
You're a big fantasy guy. Which one of these running back signings are you most excited about?
Oh my God.
Is it Henry?
I don't even know where to start. It's definitely Derrick Henry.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, it's fair.
In terms of where you would have had them before to where you have them now, but Saquon Barkley was an excellent fantasy asset last year. This just makes him a little bit better. I think that fit in Philadelphia.
It's definitely a better offensive line to start with. I wouldn't say the same for DeAndre Swift, right? I think he's going to a bit of a project in Chicago. Downgrade. Yeah, for sure. Pollard has a chance. To be, he was an 1,100 yard rusher last year in terms of yards from scrimmage. So there's a chance that he can at least be that for Tennessee. But I'm with you. It's the Henry conversation for sure. And I certainly do not hate Josh Jacobs in that young Green Bay offense, especially knowing what they were able to do with Aaron Jones for a bunch of years.
Absolutely. And then last thing on this, and I won't make this a fantasy podcast, but I think the biggest mover up or down is actually Tajay Spears, because he was a guy that people in Dynasty Keeper Leagues really excited about with the exit of Derrick Henry. Tony Pollard coming in, he'll still have a role, but it'll be split at the very least. I'm always curious about free agency waves. That first wave is, right out of the gate, noon on Monday. We got all these big names, but I don't think that we know. It's pretty subjective. What wave would you say we are currently in of NFL free agency? How do you define waves of free agency?
Yeah, I guess we're already in 3. It does feel like it is a day by day situation now. So if this is day 3 technically, and that's kind of how I address it, I would call this
day gets its own wave.
Yeah, it's felt like that this year, I guess, maybe more so than other years. But if you're, we're in Tyler Boyd wave. We're in now. There's some names still out there, right? Xavier Howard, Justin Simmons. There's some starting players without a question still out there, and quite frankly, we haven't seen all the releases happen. So maybe it's not quite fair to say it's fully in the third shift here yet. but we're trending in that direction. There's no question about it. And really, after that Monday tampering day, just really 3-4 hours worth of that Monday, everybody's top 50 were pretty much off the board, in terms of all the rankings he had out there, ours included. So it went quickly. We're in that next step now. And, if there's a guy there now, it's either he's asking for too much money or there's probably some kind of injury history that's holding back his ability to get a contract right now.
As of right now, we've talked about some of the teams that have made massive improvements via free agency, the teams that had money to burn like Houston and Tennessee. Who are your favorites among the teams that really did free agency the right way? Maybe outside of the AFC South teams, because we already covered those. But are there other teams where you look and you kind of golf clap what they've done over the last couple of days?
Definitely Atlanta. I mean, that's going to be the storyline here for most people with Cousins and a couple of the other smaller signings. We'll see if they're done or not, because there's some defensive players that should be at least considering joining Atlanta now with everything that they've done on the offensive side of the ball. I mentioned the Colts. I think the Colts aren't done. That's another team that I'm in on with L'Jarius Sneed, which could really take that defense to the next level, building around Anthony Richardson. I think Cleveland's done sneaky good stuff. All right. There's 11 players added to Cleveland right now. And I've got 2 or 3 more being tracked right now on a watch list. So this could be a 15-player free agency for Cleveland, a team that was right there in the thick of it with Joe Flacco holding him up by his bootstraps. If Deshaun Watson's healthy and Nick Chubb returns healthy, whatever additions they've made from a depth purpose should at least make this a playoff team. So I like what they've done. But to me, the conversation is Tampa Bay, and I think you might agree with that, Brandon, right? Just running this back in that division on contracts that aren't gaudy, right? They're big, but they're not gaudy contracts. Even Levante David got a couple more million than I expected him to get coming back. Just feels like really good business out of Tampa Bay, and not so much business from a player-to-player standpoint, franchise business. This is what teams should want to do. You should want to pay players to win ball games, to get in the postseason, to make that playoff money. So I just like the approach they're taking. They could have easily spent nothing this year, literally nothing, and gone down to the bottom and completely refreshed their salary cap and gone that direction. And they're not. They're completely zagging and at least putting their effort first with, a lot more money than we've ever had in our lifetime. Let's put it that way.
Right. My theory on this is I've called it the Brady effect, because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for my lifetime, they've had moments. Yeah. They won with John Gruden back in the day. This has not been a winning culture in Tampa. All of a sudden, Tom Brady gets there. They win a Super Bowl. They're competitive again. They're as relevant as they've ever been in the history of their franchise. I think sometimes when you get the right personality in the door, winning becomes addictive, even if you can't win at the highest level. I would compare it to the Miami Heat. Miami had the big 3 with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. And you know what they've never done since? Tanked. Not once. They always just want to stick around. And last year was the best example of how that can actually benefit you, where if you just hang around long enough in the playoffs, sometimes you'll just be hot enough to push through. I think the Bucs are going with that approach, and I think it started with Tom Brady. So this offseason to me is a spillover of the Brady effect.
Look, I know you want to go here anyway. The absolute best example of this getting a taste of it and never letting that taste leave is Dallas. Dallas has won nothing. And if you're 20-something years old, you have no idea why Dallas is so popular. You have no idea at all, right? But we do. We know. And it's from forever ago. But they've never tanked. They have never ripped the Band-Aid off. Now, they've gotten lucky as hell, right, with Romo and with Prescott in the 4th round and all these things that kind of fell in their lap. But they've never had to, because if you win enough ball games to stay relevant, you make a boatload of money. And that's what they've done. That's a $9 billion franchise, Brandon. Literally, I just looked it up. $9 billion. When's the last Super Bowl? You don't need a Super Bowl to be famous, popular, and rich. You don't. And you don't need a Super Bowl to go to the Hall of Fame. And you know what I mean? All these conversations kind of coming in and out. So you're having enough success to stay relevant, making money off it, making players a ton of money off of it, and keeping your fans at least 75% happy, right? Wouldn't you say that's the going rate in Tampa Bay right now since Brady left? They're still kind of showing, right? They're showing up. They're buying jerseys. They're listening to radio shows, right? They're doing all the things you want them to do.
They're selling themselves on Baker Mayfield. I hear it down here.
That's all it takes. 10 out of 10 prick, right? Greatest line ever. Greatest line of the offseason. You can shut it down on March 14th. He's a 10 out of 10 prick. I want to root for the guy now.
Yeah. Baker Mayfield's he's a fighter. He's a gritty guy. Now, I guess would be a good time to admit that in the mid 90s, when I first got into the NFL, I was a Dallas Cowboys fan before anything else. I don't think I've ever been to Dallas other than a layover in my life. I'm not anymore. Okay. I have pride, but in 1995, I was a card carrying member of Cowboy Nation.
It's worked.
Love them. All right. Well, okay. Well, let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys in the here and now, because they've signed a whole lot of nothing. They got a long snapper and Eric Kendricks, the linebacker. That's as far as I've made it. Have they done anything else since the last time I checked? And why are they're quiet as a church mouse? What's going on?
They haven't. All right. It's not something I think that they want to get into right now. They just their price tags, at least in terms of what they believe, are all still too high. They want to be in that actual third wave of free agency for whatever holes they're looking to fill this way. And certainly there's a big draft coming for Dallas, which is the right way to reset some of these positions. But they're aging out of that offensive line so much that you had to think they were going to be in on one of these big fish, especially one of the guards, because I don't think that Zach Martin's going to last more than 12 more months in this franchise. And that's going to be a massive hole to replace. So I expect something here, whether it's via the trade, but I also want to put this out there. Two things. And most people know how much money they're going to have to spend here on CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott and a couple other players soon, like in a month soon. I also think that there were some injuries that we forget about on this roster last year that are going to come back and kind of be 2024 free agents or feel like 2024 free agents. And a team that was pretty darn good, maybe just as good, if not better, without having to do a whole much, right? We evaluate all these needs and holes and fills, and we can find players that certainly can improve if you just look at a PFF score or something. But I think Dallas just kind of likes who they are, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, they don't have a running back, at least a real running back, but if that's your problem, right, in 2024 in the NFL, that's like the best problem in the world to have. So I just think they like who they are. And why would we go and spend $92 million on Calvin Ridley or, $110 million on Christian Wilkins? We'll let other teams do that, and we'll plug and play as we need to. It may be, now it's not good for the media, I get it, but it may be really, really smart business coming out of Dallas right now.
That settled me down quite a bit on any sort of Cowboy criticism that I wanted to lay on them, because you're right. We do this every year. Got to remember to breathe this time of year. Very rarely does the team that wins in March win in January and February. That's not how it's done. It can help, but if you're winning the day, that's not always the answer. Right. Would the Miami Dolphins be the AFC version of this? They have signed a few more guys, like the Jordan Brooks signing from Seattle. But is that sort of a similar approach where they still have a lot of talent, even if they haven't made a ton of moves?
They do have talent, but they did lose a half dozen pretty good players. They lost a starter
every hour of the first couple hours of free agency.
Yeah, so it could be a subtraction by subtraction problem coming out of Miami. But again, they can fix some things with the draft, hopefully, if they play their cards right there. And this is a team, this is a destination, not just the team, but the city itself. So if you've got some late players that have names, this is going to be one of those teams they're going to want to drop into. So I don't count Miami out as a late free agent boom. Maybe 2-3 nice signings coming here, maybe today or tomorrow. But there's no question that they lost players that they simply have not been able to replace on day one or day two. And we'll see how creative they get, maybe via the trade here in a couple of days.
Let's wrap up with our quick hits for today's episode. We'll stay in the NFL. Give me the player that you think is traded first among this list. T. Higgins, Justin Fields, Joey Bosa, L'Jarius Sneed.
Okay. Can I completely zag on you here?
We're going off the board.
Yeah. I mean, Sneed's going to go. I am TBD on Fields right now. I think Higgins, I think I told you this the second the tag hit. They're keeping him on that tag. They love him on this franchise tag. They're not trading him unless they're absolutely blown away. And I think Joey Bosa is going to get cut. And I've been saying that since December. I just don't know anybody that wants to take his injury history on a $22 million salary this year. So that's a release for me. I'm going to give you two more wide receivers because I think they're both on the block right now. Keenan Allen, to stick with the Chargers, who I know says he doesn't want to be traded, and Brandon Ayuk from San Francisco. And I know that's quieted down quite a bit, but trust me, if things are quiet in the middle of March, it probably means things are happening behind the scenes. And oh, by the way, would that be the worst player for player trade if we add some draft picks in with Ayuk and his age? I feel like
You're saying Ayuk for Keenan Allen?
Yeah. Wouldn't San Francisco benefit from one final year of Keenan Allen on that contract? And then certainly the Chargers would benefit from a long term of Brandon Ayuk to go along with Quentin Johnson. I actually kind of makes a little bit of sense here for both squads. But
I don't like this for San Francisco. I think I'd rather trade Deebo Samuel.
Oh my goodness.
Well, you already have a gadget guy. Like, you don't need two gadget guys.
Oh, I
think you need someone who can stretch the field.
I think that's their special sauce. So I'm against you on this one. But those are two names I think at least are sitting on the trade block that could be completely taking over the news feeds here in the next 24 to 48 hours. But like Keenan Allen said he doesn't want to go. The thing with the Chargers is I'm not sure that this new organization knows who they are yet. And they're going to make some rash decisions for financial purposes in 2024 that they may regret or that may really bolster them. Let's put it this way. You and I talked about this quite a bit. This is going to be a running team. There's no question about it, even though Justin Herbert is, certainly a gunslinger. Is Gus Edwards enough? I mean, what are they doing at this position? There were 12 options. I cannot believe that's the running back that they landed on. I had Barkley tagged for this team. I'm just not thrilled with how the Chargers have operated over the first couple of days here, knowing that they have to gut at least one more major player off this roster.
They're going to sign somebody else. There's still running backs that are out there, J.K. Dobbins, and they'll be in the market in the draft. I think you do have to pair Gus Edwards with someone, but he's not a bad place to start, especially in a Greg Roman offense. He's familiar with that guy, but that guy's going to run by committee, no doubt. How about Keenan Allen to the Jags? I think Trevor Lawrence could really use somebody like that.
Yeah, I think he moves. I really do think Keenan Allen moves at the end of the day. It just seems like there's not an extension coming. Once they move on from Bosa, it'll be easier to move on from another high-profile player and really kind of reset the process a little bit, which is exactly what the Chargers should be doing right now. There's no question about it.
The Raiders have Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell on their roster as their quarterbacks entering 2024, at least as of right now. Is this a clear signal they're taking a quarterback at 13?
How about $15 million fully guaranteed for Gardner Minshew? By the way, great for him. That's phenomenal. But I mean, when you start looking at some of these free agent contracts, he's in like the top third of guarantees, fully guaranteed at signing. It's just a phenomenal story. The Raiders cannot stop being the Raiders. I don't know where this is going. I don't know if it's going to be a high draft pick. I still think this is a Fields destination, even though that might be crazy now. Everything's on the table. It's, to me, they're just going to try to throw everything at once into the summer, and hopefully one of these players sticks. And that could be a draft pick, that could be Fields, that could be Ryan Tannehill for all we know. But $15 million to Minshew says he's at least got an opportunity to win this job. There's no question.
I think he's the day one starter.
Yeah,
it feels like they're going to draft somebody, but I think Gardner Minshew is the week one starter for the Las Vegas Raiders.
Incredible. What a story.
Yeah, and he's earned it. He's played really well. Mm-hmm. I'll give you your baseball fix, and then we'll wrap this one up. Dylan Cease coming off of a down year, but he's going to get to prove himself in San Diego. The Padres and White Sox struck a deal. Do you like this for San Diego?
Yeah, I spoke to one of our baseball guys here this morning about it. It sounds like they gave up about 4 B2C prospects for 2 years of term on Dylan Cease. This is not a rental, right? He's got an $8 million salary this year and then one more arbitration season, which is probably in the 12 to 14 million range. So 2 for 22 on probably your second best pitcher. And if he can prove to be, the next version of Blake Snell, which I think there's a chance he can be, then certainly you've done your team, at least a solid over the next couple of seasons to try to compete with the Arizonas and the Dodgers of the world.
Well, I guess this next one will be a team that desperately needs Snell if they didn't already. Gerrit Cole has been shut down by the Yankees due to elbow discomfort. He's already been ruled out for opening day. Should panic be setting in for Yankees fans?
Yeah, I've been watching quite a bit of the New York broadcast, as you might imagine, and they're saying months. They're not saying weeks, they're saying months on Gerrit Cole. So it's certainly something to be freaked out about if you're a Yankees fan, especially if you're a Yankees fan who for the last 2 months has been saying they just need one more pitcher. Well, now they need two, right? Because
they better be good.
Yeah, this guy is not going to be available, and they are not going to quickly bring him back because that's not what you do with an ace pitcher. So it's going to be months. I expect them to move. I don't think it'll be Snell or Montgomery. It'll probably be something a little bit less newsworthy, but that's probably the best approach right now if you're trying to stay within reason in terms of your luxury tax and still trying to compete in this AL East, which is just an absolute behemoth right now.
And a credit to you, Mike, for not saying welcome to my world as a Mets fan throughout that analysis, because I thought you
it was in the back of my mind the whole time. Don't worry.
Check me out on Twitter at Brandon Kravitz. And if you're looking for a podcast assist or any audio production, I can be your guy. AuthenticAudioPro.com for more details on that. Hit rate and subscribe on this podcast. And make sure you visit SpotTrack.com for all the latest in the sports contractual world. There's no better time of year to do that than right now. Mike, always a pleasure. What do you do it again next week?
Thank you.